Hello all, Rick here with a video on a famous station of Star Trek's original series, K7. Deep Space K7 is a Federation-owned and operated outpost in the fringes of the Beta Quadrant, nearby to the Klingon border. This has placed it in a precarious position during its existence, then a prosperous one before finally fading from relevance in time. Although UFP-run, it was not managed by Starfleets, which is probably a factor in its continued existence. Let's take a look at the beginning of its story, drawn in part from Apocrypha. 17 K-class stations were constructed in 2238 and put into service by the early 2240s onwards. They are relatively simple and reserved designs compared to some more elaborate and active Starfleet bases. There are several options for the creation of these smaller stations. Either parts were ferried out to a location and it was constructed there, or it was built at a facility elsewhere and transported in its entirety. While both are logistical feats, it is not impossible to shift a station. By the 32nd century, we can see that Starfleet stations are basically warp-capable under their own power to relocate when needed. Early on, however, stations could shift themselves, but only at sublight impulse speeds. However, multiple tug ships working in tandem could generate a large enough warp bubble to enclose a station and gradually drag it into place. These stations were made to be cargo or trade hubs, with a secondary function to provide others with a port to dock at to make repairs and use the facilities. While some were staffed by Starfleet personnel, it was not mandatory, and even non-Federation citizens could operate a shop or warehouse on a station with permission of its commander. In fact, K7 actually made it a bit of a point to have a large civilian populace in place of Starfleet personnel, although Starfleet did act as the station's security and general operations. The people in charge, however, were civilian, in order to not draw unwanted ire of the Klingons, as it was, after all, stationed close to their border and it did not want to come across as a military outpost. Standard crew was 798, only 86 of which were officers, with housing for 864 visitors. Additionally, the K-series had no armaments. However, it was categorically a Federation outpost and as such also served as a very visual enforcement of the border. It too would monitor the area for Klingon activity, and while not a threat itself, could call on aid quickly. The main section contains a donut-shaped arboretum. The central pillar houses most of the facilities visitors would frequent, from amusement, bars, trading posts, even casinos and so on. I assume probably a rec deck or two, although holodecks were rudimentary at this time. The upper dome housed a small lab section, communications, station command, and the admin block. The middle pod contained the main computers, sickbay, food prep, and a transportation nexus, which managed the many tram-like turbolifts that ran down the pylons. The lowest pod held the shuttle bays for visitors to the station and the station's own courier and repair vessels. The module on the side of the main saucer housed the reactor core and fuel reserves, both of which could be jettisoned in emergencies. The pylons were not just walkways. Alongside the turbolift shaft, they contained a lot of the cargo bays and crew quarters, alongside a walkway for access. Imagine going for a run down that corridor. Each of the three arm complexes were more or less the same internally. There were a couple of recreational facilities in each, such as a gym, observation lounge and such, but the spires were the dedicated guest staterooms with diminutive versions of what you would find in the main spire: a med station, a standard fabrication and recycling system, local security stations, and a command point. Station K7 itself was in the Donatu sector, only 3.6 light-years away from a Klingon outpost, and it seems to have made it through the Klingon War pretty much unscathed. By the 2260s, Klingons even made use of the station for its intended purpose, so long as they abided by its rules. During the closing days of the war, the Klingon Empire was targeting even civilian worlds, as the houses tried to outdo each other in a mad scrabble to claim territory regardless of tactical value or honour gained. However, by this stage, the Empire had completely blown past the inconsequential K7 in favour of targeting areas in deeper UFP space. Nevertheless, they did occupy the station quickly, but without defences and a civilian locale, it saw no combat. When the Klingons retreated in 2257, they released the asset once again. After all, it held almost no tactical benefit and had never been a Starfleet outpost. Of course, one of the biggest claims to infamy the station had was in 2268 when it suffered a Tribble infestation after Cyrano Jones introduced the vermin to the station and they managed to get into its food stores. They managed to get it under control at least, which is just as well, or the Klingon Empire might have reconsidered blowing the station apart. Now, this did also serve to uncover and foil a poisoning attempt by the IKS Groth and a Klingon agent under the adopted identity Arn Darwin. Now, with the truce between the Klingon Empire and the UFP after the Treaty of Organia, the station saw an increase in traffic from the two powers as a neutral ground. And while tensions often remained, after the Tribble incident, security intensified, but so did the commitment to remaining non-confrontational. When the Khitomer Accords were ratified and a true peace declared, the station was at its most prosperous, seeing a multitude of trade flow through it from people wishing to deal with the Empire, and more Klingons, outside of the warrior caste, able to securely do business beyond their borders at last. However, it would also spell the end for the station. As the peace continued, trade diminished as the need for such a neutral ground meeting hub vanished. Over the decades, Klingon traders were routinely permitted into Federation space and vice versa, so many cargo lanes were now simply bypassing K7 altogether. Inspections of Klingon cargo were handled by Starfleet ships, not civilian-run space stations on the border, and again, the same can be said in reverse for the Klingons. By 2340, K7 was still operational but incredibly run down, as its small Starfleet presence was reassigned elsewhere, and the civilian populace, mostly those in trade and shipping, were also moving on to greener pastures. In canon, we don't know what happened to K7 in the end, but it gets a mention in several books and other media, which I consider to be alternate timelines or what-if scenarios at the least. In 2376, it had become a location of disrepute, with its faded glory giving way to a hub for illicit trade, smuggling, and stolen goods. However, in the continuity of Star Trek Online, the station was actually reclaimed by the Federation and converted into a Starfleet facility in earnest. It remained unarmed, however, continuing its dedication to impartiality, but it was relocated to the nearby Sherman's planet. According to that setting, it was assigned to be the first command of Commander Naomi Wildman in 2409, with her first officer, Iche... Oh. No, that last bit got retconned. Well, at least you can find the Xenaxian Captain Mackenzie Calhoun there too, in charge of overseeing tactical operations in the area. Sherman's planet was the destination for the grain shipment that the Enterprise was supposed to be hauling in the Trouble with Tribbles, and discovered in 2067 by astronomer John Burke. So, Starfleet knew there was a world there for some time. Settlers began to colonise the world by 2152, however its proximity to the Klingon border meant that it was often contested. It had twin capital cities, as the planet itself was settled by both Federation and Klingon settlers. Port Emily was the UFP side, and Kahat was the Klingons. The Treaty of Organia dictated that the side which most effectively developed it would gain ownership, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the Federation has more experience in developing colony worlds and gained control over it. However, a famine struck it 2 years later, despite Federation aid, and the Klingon Empire often simply stated that it was their world too. By the mid-24th century, it was considered a neutral planet once more, but in 2378, it was a Federation planet once again. Today, it has a population of 98 million humans and 116.2 million Klingons. But back to K7. This station was an important place for a time, and it's a reminder that the Federation might often create colonies and outposts, but that those don't always equate to being Starfleet facilities. In K7's case, it was staffed only by those necessary Starfleet personnel who actually kept the maintenance and operations going, and a token security force. Its fate can go one of three ways, I think. Either it does fall into obscurity until it's sold off or scrapped, or it can be reclaimed by Starfleet and repurposed, or something in the galactic landscape shifts, offering new opportunities and attention to its sector, revitalising it. Thanks for watching this breakdown on Station K7, its purpose and potential. I've been Rick. Until the next one, thanks again, and goodbye.